It was the sort of funeral that inspired faintly satirical poetry in provincial magazines. Low clouds, a small wind-battered church on the Northumbrian coast, and a corpse universally described as a fine old gentleman. The vicar, whose Christian charity had frayed visibly by the third hymn, gave a eulogy so devoutly colourless that one might have thought he was trying to dissuade God from undue expectations. Canon Avil was a man of routine, of Christian punctuality, and of moderation in all things. The vicar intoned, his eyes flicking nervously toward the coffin as though it might contradict him. He rose precisely at 7 each morning, took tea at 4, and was never known to speak in haste. "Well," murmured Lord Peter Wimsey to himself, delicately brushing a stray raindrop off his sleeve. "There's a eulogy to inspire the spirit. Makes one rather long for a touch of damnation, just for the drama." He had not been invited, strictly speaking, but an old friend of the family, Lady Whodunit, had written him a letter full of curious vagueness and barely suppressed anxiety. "It is all very unexpected, Peter. The canon was so fastidious, so rigid. And then this strange business with the clock. You always notice things other people don't. Could you come?" So Wimsey came. He always did when clocks behaved oddly. He stood now in the churchyard, half sheltered beneath a funereal yew, watching the mourners file past the newly dug grave. The sea could be heard crashing on the cliffs below, a dull, persistent roar that seemed determined to undermine solemnity. "Peter," said Lady Whodunit, appearing at his elbow with a tremor of lace and camphor. "You don't suppose it was really his heart, do you?" "My dear Lady Whodunit," said Wimsey with a mild bow, "for a retired clergyman of 75, the list of fatal possibilities is rather extensive. The heart's certainly not out of the question. Though you mentioned something about a clock." She looked furtively around. "Yes, the watch on his bedside table. When they found him, it was 3 hours fast. But the canon, he was obsessively precise. He would never allow such a thing. He even rebuked the gardener once for trimming the hedge at 11:58 when he had been told noon. You see, it's odd." "Oddness," said Wimsey cheerfully, "is the poor man's prelude to catastrophe." "And then," Lady Whodunit added with a troubled glance at the vicar, now shaking hands with a solemn elderly lady in gloves several sizes too large, "there's the matter of the will." "Ah," said Wimsey, and his eyes grew bright. "There is always a matter of the will." Lady Whodunit leaned closer, whispering like a conspirator. "He altered it just a week ago, cut out his nephew entirely, and left everything to his housekeeper, Mrs. Brill. She's been with him for years, of course. But the change, well, it caused quite a stir. He told me he expected trouble." Wimsey nodded slowly, gazing toward the modest vicarage just beyond the lich gate, half obscured by a leafless birch that seemed to shiver with indignation at being left out of the spring bloom. "So, we have a punctual man, whose watch was fast, a changed will, and a housekeeper now in unexpected possession of a small fortune. It does tick ever so softly in the air, doesn't it?" She sighed. "The doctor said it was natural causes. But it doesn't feel right. It's as though the entire house is trying not to be heard." "A very dangerous condition for a house," said Wimsey gravely. "Murder, you know, is often committed in silence, but silence itself, Lady Whodunit, is never innocent." At that moment the vicar approached, his brows knit in discomfort at seeing the impeccably tailored figure of Lord Peter conversing in the sacred proximity of grave soil. "Lord Peter Wimsey," he said, as though the name were unfamiliar but unpleasantly resonant. "This is a surprise." "I dare say," said Wimsey lightly. "Funerals, like scandals and Scottish weather, seem to draw me in." The vicar hesitated. "If you are here in any official capacity—" "Oh dear no," interrupted Wimsey. "I'm entirely unofficial to the point of invisibility. Think of me as a wandering cloud or a nosy cherub, a friend of the late canon's circle, though I do have a soft spot for anomalous horology. I understand his watch was in a defiant mood." The vicar looked flustered. Yes, well, the matter of the watch has been exaggerated. It was likely a simple mistake. And yet, said Wimsey, for a man who once wrote a letter to the Church Times correcting the date of the Council of Nicaea, 3 hours' error seems positively heretical. The vicar coughed. If you'll excuse me, I must tend to the, post-burial tea. He retreated, leaving Wimsey with a faint smile and an expression of mild amusement that often heralded the beginning of something profoundly inconvenient for someone else. Well, he murmured, let us begin with the watch. For if it was 3 hours fast at death, one must ask, was it fast before he died or only afterward? And who, pray, sets a dead man's watch wrong? As if in answer, a gust of wind whipped across the churchyard, sending dry petals skittering like whispers over the tombstones. Lord Peter turned toward the vicarage, hands in the pockets, humming a bar Purcell. The house, it seemed, awaited him, and it was not in a mood to talk. Wimsey reached the vicarage just as the clouds, evidently displeased with mere suggestion, released a renewed drizzle. He stepped inside to the fuggy warmth of a drawing-room where time had not merely stood still, but had curled up on a horsehair divan and grown dusty. Floral antimacassars perched stiffly on every available surface. A brass clock on the mantel struck a faint, tinny quarter past something. It was unclear whether morning or afternoon. Lady Whodunit led him to a low table crowded with teacups, where 3 mourners conversed in that brittle, elliptical way of English country folk faced with death and no cows to discuss. Lord Peter, she said quietly, this is Miss Rachel Montague, Canon Avile's niece, and her husband, Dr. Henry Montague, and this is Mr. Eldred Thorne, the Canon's solicitor. Rachel Montague was a narrow woman in every sense, her features sharp as vinegar and her hair wound tight enough to create migraines in smaller women. Her husband gave off the earnest but haggard air of a country GP too long in the business of chronic arthritis and reluctant pregnancies. Eldred Thorne, by contrast, was precisely the sort of man one expects a provincial solicitor to be, a great whiskery walrus in an old tweed coat with yellowed fingers and an air of disappointed piety. "How do you do?" Wimsey said pleasantly. "Terrible occasion, but your sandwiches are a tribute to civilization. Do you know, Lady Whodunit, I have long suspected that the true barometer of English moral fibre is the cucumber sandwich. When they become soggy, we are surely lost." Rachel gave a brittle smile. "You are acquainted with my uncle?" "Only by reputation, and by that I mean the sort of reputation that writes furious letters to editors about the dating of the Vulgate," said Wimsey. "But I am interested in men of precision, and your uncle seems to have been positively horological." Eldred Thorne's moustache twitched. He was a man of absolute routine, yes. You could set your watch by his habits, ironically enough. Wimsey sipped his tea. Irony, Mr. Thorne, is so often the undertaker at reason's funeral. Rachel stiffened. "If you are here to dig up scandal, Lord Peter—" "Good heavens, no," said Wimsey quickly. "I have a perfectly adequate spade at home and no need to bludgeon the soil for secrets. But Lady Whodunit mentioned the watch. I collect oddities of timekeeping, unpunctual clocks, ghost chimes, that sort of thing. One hears your uncle's watch was enthusiastic." Thorne frowned. 3 hours fast. Curious, yes, but hardly fatal. "It might not be unless the canon relied upon it for something terminal," said Wimsey mildly. "Tell me, Doctor, who found the body?" Henry Montague, who had been staring morosely into a slice of Battenberg, looked up. "Mrs. Brill. She said he'd not come down for his 7 o'clock tea, which was utterly unlike him. She went up at 7:15, found him lying on the bed, one shoe on, one off, clutching his watch in his right hand." Murmured Wimsey. "A little theatrical, don't you think? The one-shoed corpse always smacks of gesture." "Mrs. Brill thought he had been getting ready for a walk," Rachel offered. "He always took a short walk at 6:30 in the evening, round the rose garden. Indeed, said Whimsy. And yet the watch read 10:15. There was an awkward pause. Has anyone examined the timepieces in the house? He asked. Rachel blinked. Why should they? Because a man obsessed with punctuality rarely tolerates disharmony among his clocks, said Whimsy. A 3-hour discrepancy in a carefully calibrated household is not an accident. It's a message, or a mistake. I wonder which. Thorne cleared his throat. Perhaps you ought to speak to Mrs. Brill directly. I should be delighted, said Whimsy. Housekeepers often have a better grip on reality than clergy. Something to do with floor polish and human nature. Lady Whodunit led him through to the canon's study, where a grey-haired woman stood at the window, stiff-backed and alert as a sentinel. She turned as they entered. Mrs. Brill, said Lady Whodunit gently, this is Lord Peter Whimsy. He's taking an interest. Very good, said Mrs. Brill in a voice as flat and hard as a ledger. It's high time someone did. Whimsy studied her for a moment. She was neither grieving nor indifferent, but something more complex, a tension between loyalty and defiance. He had seen it before in long-serving retainers of dead men who were never quite as saintly as remembered. You found the canon? He asked. Yes, I brought up his tea, tray still in my hands when I saw him. The light was off. I turned it on. He was lying across the bed, still dressed. Shoe missing. He was holding his watch. You didn't move anything. I placed the tray on the chest and called Dr. Montague. Then I left everything as it was. Very methodical, said Whimsy approvingly. And the watch? In his hand, not on the table, not on the dresser, in his hand, like he was trying to say something. Or like someone wanted him to be saying something, Whimsy murmured. Tell me, Mrs. Brill, was the watch ever fast before? Never, she said at once. It was wound nightly at 9. He always checked it against the clock on the mantel. And that clock? He asked. 8:15, she said crisply, as it should have been. May I see it? She led him into the canon's bedroom. It was austere and faintly monastic, save for a velvet armchair that looked suspiciously comfortable. The mantel clock ticked with sedate certainty, its long brass pendulum swinging like the conscience of a banker. Whimsy compared it with his own pocket watch. Perfectly matched. Curious, he said softly. Tell me, Mrs. Brill, who else had access to this room? No one but me, and the canon. Not even the nephew. A faint purse of the lips. Mr. Miles Avil came for a few days last month, but they quarreled. About the will? She hesitated. About something. Something or someone? Whimsy asked, watching her carefully. Her eyes did not flinch. Mr. Miles was not what the canon would call a godly man, nor a grateful one. And yet he was here last month. Did he stay in the house? No. He took a room at the Crown. They met daily. The canon was firm with him. Afterwards he came back, disturbed. He stayed up late, wrote letters, burned one of them. Burned it? In the grate there, she said. I cleaned it next morning. He left the ashes neatly in the corner. Said it was the only thing that had gone up in smoke with any dignity that week. Whimsy knelt by the hearth and stirred the ashes with a gloved finger. Faint remains of thick parchment and sealing wax. No more. But the scent was still faintly acrid, like scorched silk. He stood. Mrs. Brill, what time did the canon go to bed? Always at 10. And yet you say he hadn't risen by 7? No. Door shut. No sound. That's why I knocked. And the doctor confirmed he died. Somewhere after 10, perhaps around midnight. He was vague. Doctors often are when the dead are inconvenient, said Whimsy lightly. Thank you. You've been most precise. He stepped back into the hallway, and Lady Whodunit reappeared, looking troubled. You're frowning, she said. That usually means you've spotted something absurd. Not absurd, said Whimsy, but incompatible. Incompatible with what? "With being dead in the right way," he said. "Too many things in the wrong place, and one too many in the right. Tell me, did anyone else know about the new will? I believe Eldred Thorne prepared it, but the canon hadn't signed it yet." Wimsey stopped short. He hadn't signed it. No, he meant to do it the next morning, said he wanted one more look at the clauses. Wimsey turned slowly to look back at the bedroom. "Then," he said quietly, "Mrs. Brill has inherited precisely nothing." Lady Whodunit blinked. "Then why?" "Why indeed?" murmured Wimsey, "unless someone knew she hadn't, or assumed she had." Outside, the rain grew heavier. Wimsey turned to the stairs, eyes bright. "It's time I spoke to the nephew. I wonder how much time he thought he had left." Lord Peter Wimsey walked from the vicarage into the wet lane beyond, his tall frame hunched under a ridiculous green umbrella that might have belonged to a Regency dandy or a war poet. His thoughts were not so much tangled as carefully unwinding themselves, like a clock mechanism being reversed by gentle, practiced fingers. The canon's punctuality, his meticulous routine, his firm attachment to orderly time, had not been simply a quirk. It had been, as Wimsey was beginning to suspect, his fortress. And someone had breached it. At the Crown Inn, a low building with smoke-blackened beams and the dim, beery air of quiet scandal, Wimsey found Miles Avil seated in a corner, nursing a pint as though it had offended him. He was a handsome man in that faintly misshapen way often found in those who've been too long admired. Eyes too bright, mouth too deliberate. His collar was slightly frayed, though his cufflinks were gold. He looked up when Wimsey entered, and, seeing the unmistakable cut of a city suit in a village pub, frowned. "Mr. Avil," said Wimsey, easing into the chair opposite without invitation, "allow me to introduce myself. Lord Peter Wimsey, amateur of crime, professional of conversation. I hope I'm not interrupting anything criminally dull." Miles regarded him with a wariness not quite concealed by the bland smile that followed. "Lord Peter? You're here about my uncle, I suppose." "Indeed. It's all rather inconvenient for him, being dead. But terribly convenient for someone else." The younger man's eyes flickered. "Are you implying something?" "Only that funerals often produce inheritances, and inheritances often produce discomfort." Miles leaned back, folding his arms. "Well, if you're here to accuse me, you'd best be direct." "Oh, not at all," said Wimsey cheerfully. "I haven't the least interest in accusations. I'm merely interested in time. Your uncle's watch was found 3 hours fast. Now that doesn't sound like much, but for a man who considered Greenwich to be a sacred institution, it's a bit like finding a bishop in dancing shoes." Miles smiled faintly. He did care about the time. "And did he care about you?" The smile vanished. "He used to, before he decided that morality was more important than family." "Ah, the dreadful moment when righteousness interferes with sentiment. May I ask, what was the quarrel about?" Miles's jaw tightened. "He didn't approve of how I lived. My business ventures. Some gambling debts, if you must know. Debts are very modern, almost fashionable, but wills are not. He said he was changing it," Miles said slowly. "Said he was tired of warning me. That Mrs. Brill had earned his trust in a way his family had not. That's how he put it. And when was this?" "Last month. He summoned me to reconsider my path. Instead, he berated me over supper and handed me a prayer book. Told me to make better choices before the Lord makes them for me." Wimsey drummed his fingers softly against the table. "And you left when?" "The next day. Early. I didn't return." "No?" "Well," said Miles, eyes narrowing, "I did come back, 2 nights before he died, to apologize." "Apologize," said Wimsey, raising a brow. "He wrote me a letter, asked me to visit again. Said he was reconsidering, wanted to speak heart to heart, he said." "And did you?" Miles hesitated. He wasn't well. I came in late, around 9:30. We spoke in his study. He looked tired, almost frightened. Said something had changed, that someone had betrayed his trust. And you assumed he meant you? I assumed Mrs. Brill had turned him against me, he said. But now I wonder. Whimsy nodded slowly. What time did you leave? 10:15. He said he was going to bed. Did you notice anything odd? Miles considered. He locked the study door behind me. He'd never done that before. Whimsy sat back, watching the foam on his untouched ale settle into patterns. Would you object, Mr. Avil, if I requested a search of your room at the inn? Miles straightened. On what grounds? Only that your uncle burned one letter the day before his death, and one wonders what became of the others. The young man stared at him. Then, with a sigh that seemed torn from some long-exhausted reserve, he stood. Come on, then. The room upstairs was sparse. Single bed, oak writing desk, small valise. Whimsy ignored the polite hesitation and opened the top drawer without ceremony. Inside, amid a few odds and ends, a penknife, a half-smoked cigar, a collar stud, lay a folded piece of parchment. It was creased as though handled many times, but not burned. Whimsy drew it out. It was the canon's hand, unmistakable. The same looping ascenders, the same precise periods. He read aloud, My dear Miles, I have made a grave mistake. I fear I have entrusted too much to a woman who has grown cleverer than I gave her credit for. She has taken liberties in the household. Secrets and small thefts I overlooked now appear part of something larger. There is danger here, but I must see it through. If anything happens to me before we speak again, you must look to the clocks. They will tell you everything. Uncle Edwin. Whimsy whistled low. Miles muttered, I didn't know what to make of it. I thought it was just more paranoia. But you didn't burn it. I nearly did. Then he died. I didn't know what to think. Whimsy folded the letter carefully and slid it into his coat. Well, he said, this makes things rather awkward for Mrs. Brill. But if he didn't sign the new will, exactly, there's nothing for her to gain. And yet he believed she posed a danger. Now I wonder, what? I wonder if the danger wasn't for him, but from him. Someone else knew about the new will. Someone who didn't want it signed. Someone who knew the clocks could betray them. The question is, who had access to the bedroom between 10:15 and 7? Miles frowned. I suppose anyone with a key? Or someone already inside? Whimsy turned to the door. Mr. Avil, would you like a chance to redeem yourself? Miles blinked. What do you mean? I mean I intend to visit Mrs. Brill tonight, and I think you should come with me. The house may be silent, but there's a great deal it hasn't said yet. The rain had stopped. The air outside smelled of stone and sodden grass and faint suspicion. As they descended the narrow stairs of the inn, Whimsy checked his watch. 8:45. Time, he said softly, is running out, and someone is about to realize they set it wrong. The night settled heavily over Little Harrington as Whimsy and Miles Avil approached the vicarage once more. The village, usually a scene of quaint stillness, seemed on edge, as if it too had been holding its breath since the canon's untimely death. The lamps along the main street flickered uncertainly, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the damp cobblestones. The chill air was thick with the scent of wet earth and something else, something faintly metallic and unsettling. Lady Whodunit opened the door before they could knock, her face pale but composed. I thought you might be back, she said softly, stepping aside to admit them. Is it wise, going at this hour? Necessity has its own clock, Whimsy replied with a faint smile, and in this case it demands a late hour. He glanced at Miles, whose tense shoulders barely betrayed his unease. Inside, the house was unnervingly quiet. The faint tick of the mantel clock in the canon's study seemed louder somehow, as if magnified by the silence. Mrs. Brill appeared from the kitchen, her expression unreadable beneath the harsh overhead light. "I wasn't expecting visitors," she said curtly, eyeing Miles with suspicion. Whimsy inclined his head politely. "Mrs. Brill, I believe you and I have some unfinished business." The housekeeper's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing, merely motioning toward the study. Whimsy followed, Miles trailing behind with a hesitant step. The study, bathed in the soft glow of a shaded lamp, was as orderly as before. The familiar scent of aged paper and faint tobacco smoke clung to the air. Whimsy's eyes scanned the room, lingering on the locked drawer in the desk, the scattered books on theology and astronomy, and the small clock on the wall. Still stubbornly 8:15. "Mrs. Brill," Whimsy began, "you told me your duties included winding the canon's watch at 9 each evening." "That's right," she said. "He was very particular." "And you say the watch was found in his hand 3 hours fast?" She nodded, her fingers tightening on the back of a chair. "When I found him, yes. The watch was in his right hand." Whimsy's gaze shifted toward the desk. "May I ask, was this drawer ever locked?" Mrs. Brill's lips pressed into a thin line. "Only when the canon was particularly anxious. But he had the key on a chain around his neck. No one else had access." "Except you," Whimsy prompted gently. Her eyes flicked away. "I had the key once. He asked me to keep it safe for a day or two when he was away on a trip, but I never used it." "Curious," said Whimsy. "And what of the letters you mentioned? The canon's note to his nephew and the one he burned?" Mrs. Brill stiffened. "I never saw the note. The letter he burned was in the grate that morning. I cleaned the ashes myself." "Did you see anything else in the study that morning? Anything out of place?" She hesitated. A book was open on the desk. The Bible. He had underlined a passage in red ink. Something about trust and betrayal. Whimsy moved to the desk and gently turned the pages until he found the marked passage. "For there is nothing covered that shall not be revealed, neither hid that shall not be known." He looked up at Mrs. Brill. Profound words, especially in these circumstances. Mrs. Brill said nothing, but her hands clenched and unclenched. Whimsy returned to the mantel clock. "And the time on this clock, 8:15, was it accurate that morning?" "Yes," Mrs. Brill replied firmly. "I checked it against my own watch when I arrived." "Then why was the canon's watch 3 hours fast?" Whimsy asked. "It suggests someone tampered with it deliberately, to send a message." Mrs. Brill's eyes darkened. "You think someone wanted to mislead us?" "Precisely." He turned toward Miles. "Mr. Avil, you told me your uncle locked the study door when you left at 10:15. Did anyone else have keys to this room?" Miles shook his head. "No. Only Uncle Edwin and Mrs. Brill, as far as I know." Whimsy nodded slowly, piecing the puzzle together. "And when did Mrs. Brill last see the canon alive?" "Just before I left," Miles said. "Around 10:15. He seemed tired, but well enough." Whimsy's eyes narrowed. "And Mrs. Brill, were you alone in the house that night?" She hesitated, then said quietly, "No. I heard footsteps in the hall well after I'd finished my duties. I thought it might be the canon, but when I checked, the corridor was empty." "Did you see anyone?" "No," she said firmly. "But I know I was not alone." Whimsy glanced at Miles. "Did you hear or see anything unusual when you left?" "Only that the village seemed quieter than usual," Miles replied, almost as if it were holding its breath. The three exchanged uneasy looks. Whimsy paced slowly, hands behind his back, considering. "There is a temporal puzzle here," he mused aloud. "The canon's watch is fast. The mantel clock is right. The body was found at a time inconsistent with the watch. The study door was locked after your visit, Miles. Yet someone was moving about the house afterward. Mrs. Brill heard footsteps but saw no one. He stopped in front of Mrs. Brill. "You say the canon was afraid of betrayal. Can you think of anyone else who might have wanted to harm him?" She swallowed hard, her eyes darting toward the doorway. "There was talk of a visitor, a man who came unannounced a few days ago. The canon refused to see him, but I heard raised voices." Whimsy's interest sharpened. "Did you catch the name?" "No. Only that the man seemed angry, demanding something the canon wouldn't give." "And was this visitor admitted into the house?" "No. He waited outside in the rain." Whimsy considered the timeline. "And when was this visit?" 3 nights before the canon's death." Miles shifted uneasily. "That must have been the night I returned to apologize." "Indeed," said Whimsy thoughtfully. "If this visitor had business with the canon, and you also visited that night, we may have a tangled web." He turned back to the mantel clock, its steady tick a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding. "Mrs. Brill," Whimsy said softly, "you have served this household for many years. You know its secrets better than most. Is there anything else you have noticed, anything odd or new in the days before the canon's death?" She hesitated, then nodded. "The canon received a parcel, a small box, wrapped in brown paper. He kept it locked away in the drawer." "Did you see what was inside?" "No, but he handled it carefully, almost fearfully." Whimsy's gaze flicked toward the locked drawer again. "May I see the key?" Mrs. Brill hesitated. "I'm not sure it's wise." "On the contrary," Whimsy said gently, "it may be the key to understanding more than just time." After a tense moment, she retrieved a small, tarnished key from her apron pocket and handed it over. Whimsy inserted it into the desk drawer, which clicked open with unexpected ease. Inside lay the parcel, now carefully opened, revealing an ornate silver locket and a folded sheet of delicate parchment. He unfolded the parchment and read, "To Edwin, beware the hands that tick against you. Time is no friend to secrets. Trust only the faithful." A friend. Whimsy looked up sharply. A warning, then. Miles swallowed. But who would want to warn him? And why keep it secret? "Because," Whimsy said quietly, "sometimes those closest to us wear the mask of friend while clutching the knife." He closed the drawer and turned to face them both. "We have a visitor who arrived angry and uninvited, a secret parcel, a locked drawer, a watch running 3 hours fast, footsteps heard but no one seen, and a will unsigned. Not to mention," Miles said slowly, "a housekeeper who hears more than she admits, and a nephew who returns to a family in pieces." Whimsy nodded. "Yes. All these elements weave a tapestry that suggests someone in this house is not as they appear." He moved toward the door, eyes sharp with resolve. "Tonight, I shall remain here to watch and listen. Mr. Avil, you will stay as well." Miles glanced at Mrs. Brill, who said nothing but gave a subtle nod. "As for you, Lady Whodunit," Whimsy said, "please prepare some tea. We shall need it before dawn." The house seemed to exhale, settling into the night's embrace. But beneath its calm surface, the clock was still ticking, toward truth, or perhaps danger. Outside, the village lay silent, but within those walls, the battle between time and secrets had only just begun. The hours that followed were heavy with the quiet tension of a house waiting to reveal its secrets. Whimsy and Miles settled into the study with a muted resolve, while Lady Whodunit left the room to fetch the promised tea, the clink of china faint but comforting against the otherwise still night. The flickering lamplight cast wavering shadows, making the heavy oak furniture appear even more somber, as if the very wood had absorbed the dread of recent events. Whimsy sat with his hands folded, his gaze drifting intermittently toward the mantel clock, its steady ticking marking time with an almost cruel indifference. His thoughts turned over the facts they had amassed, each a puzzle piece that refused to lock neatly into place. The canon's watch, 3 hours fast, had to be more than mere happenstance. It was a message or a clue layered beneath the surface of a seemingly ordinary death. Someone had manipulated time, deliberately, precisely, and the question was who and why. Miles, meanwhile, looked restless, occasionally glancing toward the door as if expecting the shadows themselves to leap forward with answers. The young man's agitation was understandable. He had returned to a household fractured by suspicion and loss, and the possibility that a close family member could have been the victim of a hidden betrayal was difficult to digest. Yet, even as doubt gnawed at him, there was a flicker of determination that hadn't been there before. Lady Whodunit returned, carrying the tea tray with quiet efficiency. She set it down without comment, as though she too felt the weight of the night pressing upon her. Whimsy poured the tea and took a slow sip, letting the warmth settle in his chest. Mrs. Brill mentioned a visitor, a man who came 3 nights ago and was refused admission. Whimsy began, breaking the silence. Do you know anything more about this individual? Miles shook his head. No, Uncle Edwin never spoke of him directly. I gathered only that the man was angry and persistent. Whimsy considered this, recalling the note they had found, the one warning of betrayal and cautioning trust only in the faithful. It seemed to hint at a rift deeper than mere family quarrels. Anger often disguises desperation, Whimsy mused. Perhaps this visitor sought something vital, information, money, or even forgiveness. Forgiveness seems unlikely, Miles said bitterly. Uncle Edwin was not a man to forgive lightly. A sudden creak echoed from the hallway, drawing their attention. Mrs. Brill's eyes flicked nervously toward the door. That happens sometimes, she said, her voice low. The house settles, or perhaps the wind plays tricks. Whimsy stood and moved to the door, opening it a crack to peer into the dim corridor. The narrow passage stretched into shadow, the wallpaper faded and peeling in places, the floorboards worn from years of footsteps. No movement, no sound but the ticking of a distant clock. Do you lock the doors at night? Whimsy asked. Yes, all but the front. It's an old habit, she replied. Then whoever walked these halls after 10:15 must have had a key or been inside already. Miles frowned. I don't know who else could have had a key besides Uncle Edwin and Mrs. Brill. Whimsy's lips pressed into a thin line. Then our circle of suspects is small indeed. He returned to the study, pacing slowly. His mind ticked through every detail once more. The locked drawer, the secret parcel, the mysterious visitor, the altered watch. Each clue threaded into the next like a pattern woven into a tapestry, complex but purposeful. Mrs. Brill, Whimsy said. Earlier you mentioned a parcel your master had received, a small box he guarded closely. Have you examined its contents? She hesitated. No. He instructed me not to touch it. I only saw it briefly before he locked it away. Do you recall the appearance of the parcel? Wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine, the kind one might use for a gift or something precious. And the locket inside, the silver one in the drawer, do you know its significance? Mrs. Brill's eyes clouded. It belonged to Mrs. Edith Farnsworth, the canon's late wife. It was the only thing he kept of hers after the accident. Whimsy nodded, the pieces coming into sharper relief. A reminder of a past he could neither forget nor fully embrace. He sat again, running a hand through his hair. The note in the parcel was signed, "A Friend." One wonders whether that friend was truly a friend or a disguised foe. Miles swallowed hard. Could it have been the visitor? Possibly. Someone wishing to warn or threaten, or to manipulate. The study door creaked again, louder this time. All three froze. Whimsy's eyes narrowed, scanning the hallway once more. No one. The house was silent once more, but the sound had broken the fragile calm. We must be vigilant, Whimsy said quietly. The night is still young, and secrets thrive in darkness. Miles nodded. I want to help. If there's any way I can clear my uncle's name. Then you will, Whimsy assured him. But we need to understand the temporal puzzle first. He rose and approached the mantel clock, fingers tracing its smooth wood. The canon's watch was fast by 3 hours. The mantel clock was accurate. What could cause such discrepancy? Mrs. Brill looked at the mantel clock. Perhaps someone adjusted the watch, hoping to confuse the time of death. Or to establish an alibi, Whimsy said. If one can control the clocks, one controls the narrative. He turned to Miles. You said your uncle locked the study door when you left at 10:15. The canon was found dead at 7 in the morning. There is a wide window of time unaccounted for. Yes, Miles agreed. Who was in the house during those hours? That is the question. Whimsy moved toward the window, peering into the dense shadows beyond. The garden was drenched in moonlight, silvery and cold. Somewhere beyond, the distant hoot of an owl punctuated the stillness. We need to inspect the grounds, Whimsy said. The truth is often hidden where the eye does not expect to look. Mrs. Brill frowned, but said nothing. Miles seemed hesitant, but inclined his head. They wrapped themselves in coats and stepped into the night. The chill air bit through the fabric, and the dew-slick grass whispered underfoot. Whimsy's keen eyes searched for disturbance. Footprints, broken twigs, anything out of place. Near the back door, a faint set of marks caught his attention. Deep impressions in the soft earth, partially obscured by fallen leaves. Kneeling, he traced the pattern carefully. These belong to a man's boots, he murmured. Heavy, worn soles. Someone moved in haste. Miles bent down beside him, brows knitting. Could they belong to the visitor? Or to Mrs. Brill, Whimsy said thoughtfully. Or perhaps to the nephew. The three looked toward the house again, its windows dark but for a single flicker of light upstairs. Returning inside, Whimsy led them back to the study and closed the door firmly. We must consider the possibility that the threat was within this household, he said. A trusted servant, a resentful relative, or a shadow from the past. Mrs. Brill's face tightened. You suggest I might be involved? Not without cause, Whimsy replied, his tone even. But every lock has a key, and every servant a secret. She shivered. I have served this family faithfully for years. As have we all served secrets, Mrs. Brill, Whimsy said softly. Sometimes the most loyal servant becomes the most dangerous when loyalty is tested. There was a long silence. Then Miles spoke. What about the will? If the canon intended to change it and the new will was unsigned, who benefits now? His estate defaults to the existing will, Whimsy said. Presumably Mrs. Brill, as housekeeper, would gain little, but the nephew stands to inherit, if he can prove his claim. But if someone destroyed the new will, Miles asked, then the truth becomes a battle not just for possession, but for legacy. Whimsy sat once more, the weight of the night settling on his shoulders. The ticking clock was relentless. We are close, he said quietly. Very close to the moment when time itself will betray the killer. And outside, in the shadows, a figure watched the house with cold eyes, knowing that the hour of reckoning was drawing near. The house seemed to breathe around them, every creak and whisper a part of its long-held secrets. Whimsy sat back in the study chair, eyes narrowing as he regarded both Miles and Mrs. Brill. The earlier discovery of the footprints near the back door had added a new dimension to their puzzle. Someone had moved stealthily, perhaps furtively, in the dead hours after the canon's departure. But whose boots had they been? Miles rubbed his temples. It's maddening. Everyone here seems to have reasons, alibis or motives, but none of them fits the strange details. The watch, the locked drawer, the secret visitor. It's like the whole thing is designed to mislead us. Whimsy nodded. The carefully placed confusion is often a sign of desperation. Our task is to strip away the deliberate obfuscations until only the raw truth remains." He stood, moving toward the window to look out into the soft morning gloom beginning to touch the edges of the horizon. "The temporal discrepancy," he murmured, "is the linchpin. The cannon's watch was set 3 hours ahead. That means the time of death was reported inaccurately, and whoever controlled the time controlled the narrative of events." Mrs. Brill's eyes flickered toward him, troubled. But why would anyone want to do that? What purpose could it serve? "To cover their tracks," Whimsy said plainly. "If the body is found at an impossible time, the killer creates an alibi or confuses witnesses. It buys them hours to establish distance from the crime." Miles paced the room, then stopped abruptly. "I remember something. When I left the house at 10:15, I was sure the cannon was alive. Yet the body was found at 7 in the morning. That means the murder happened in that window." "Yes," Whimsy said, "but the watch being 3 hours fast means the cannon's own timepiece was set to approximately 1 in the morning, not 4 as we first supposed." Mrs. Brill swallowed. "1 in the morning? But I was up until midnight and I heard nothing." "Footsteps in the hall after you went to bed," Whimsy reminded her gently. "You heard movement but saw no one. That could have been the killer, moving quietly." She nodded slowly. "I suppose that's possible." Whimsy turned to Miles. "And you, returning to your rooms after 10:15, did you notice anything unusual? Sounds, lights, anything out of place?" Miles shook his head. "No, the house was quiet. Too quiet." "Silence is a telling witness," Whimsy said, moving toward the desk. "Let us revisit the drawer and its contents." He opened it again carefully, withdrawing the silver locket and the folded parchment. The note, signed simply "A Friend," continued to weigh heavily in his mind. It had to be more than a warning. It was a veiled accusation, hinting that the cannon's death was inevitable unless he placed his trust carefully. Whimsy looked at Mrs. Brill. "Do you know anyone who might have called themselves this friend? Someone close enough to deliver such a personal message?" She shook her head. "No one comes to mind. The canon was a private man, and those he trusted were few." "The visitor, then," Whimsy said. "The angry man refused entrance a few nights ago. Could he be this friend, either genuinely or ironically?" Miles spoke, voice tight. "That visitor was the son of a former parishioner. The canon had refused to support his request for funds. The man was desperate and bitter." "A possible suspect, then," Whimsy mused. "But he was seen waiting outside and denied entry." "Unless he returned later," Miles suggested. "Or someone let him in," Mrs. Brill whispered. Whimsy considered. "Let's examine the parcel itself more closely." He carefully unwrapped the silver locket, noting its intricate design, a tiny engraving of intertwined vines. Inside, a miniature portrait of a young woman with sad eyes. "Mrs. Edith Farnsworth," Mrs. Brill confirmed softly. "The canon's late wife. He never spoke much of her, but it's said he was haunted by her death." Whimsy closed the locket and looked toward the others. A keepsake, a relic of a grief that lingered like a shadow. Could the note's warning be linked to that past grief? Was the friend a protector or a threat from a secret neither wished to reveal? The possibilities seemed to multiply, twisting like the vines on the locket. Whimsy's keen mind sought a thread to follow, a single, solid clue that might unravel the web. A sudden knock at the door startled them all. Lady Whodunit entered quietly, holding a small bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. "I found these in the canon's desk," she said softly. "They were hidden beneath the false bottom of a drawer." Whimsy took the letters with care, untied the ribbon, and unfolded the oldest one. The ink was faded but legible, written in a careful, looping hand. It was from the canon's brother, long estranged, dated years before. "Edwin, beware the man who walks in shadows. He knows the past and wishes to bury it. Trust no one outside the family." Whimsy's eyebrows rose. A family feud, a threat from within. Mrs. Brill looked pale. That would explain much. The canon's wariness, his locked drawers, the secret visitor. Miles bit his lip. If the threat was from family, could it be me? Or someone connected to me? Or someone using your name to mislead, Whimsy said. The tangled threads of suspicion are hard to unravel. He laid the letters carefully on the desk and paced once more. The room seemed to close in around them, the weight of history pressing down. Mrs. Brill, Whimsy said, you have served faithfully, but secrets must be spoken if justice is to be done. Is there anything you have withheld? Her hands trembled. There was one thing. The night the visitor came, I overheard a heated argument through the study door. I couldn't hear all the words, but I caught the name Edith and something about forgiveness and betrayal. Whimsy's eyes narrowed. That aligns with the locket and the letters, the past returning to demand its due. He turned to Miles. Did your uncle ever speak of forgiveness or betrayal? Miles shook his head. No, but he was a proud man, perhaps too proud. Pride often conceals pain, Whimsy said quietly. Tonight the house is a stage, and all its players must be watched. As the dawn crept closer, casting a pale light through the curtains, Whimsy's mind was sharp with purpose. We will examine every inch of this house and grounds once more, he said. There are secrets still hidden, and the truth waits patiently for its moment to be revealed. The three of them prepared for the long day ahead, knowing that with the rising sun, the shadow of doubt would begin to lift, or grow deeper still. The morning light grew steadily brighter, but the atmosphere within the Whodunit house remained thick with unease. The fragile thread holding the night's events together was taut and trembling, as if any wrong move might snap it entirely. Whimsy stood by the window, gazing out over the garden where the dew still clung to the grass, sparkling faintly like a scattering of tiny stars. The footprints near the back door haunted his thoughts. They were the sole tangible sign of movement during the long, dark hours when the canon had met his fate. He turned back to the room where Miles and Mrs. Brill waited silently, the letters and locket resting on the desk between them like silent witnesses to a tragedy slowly unraveling. The old letter from the canon's brother had confirmed a feud buried beneath the polite surface of the family, a feud long enough simmering to ignite deadly consequences. But the exact spark, the cause of that final, fatal act, still eluded them. We must revisit the timeline, Whimsy said quietly. We have a framework, but it requires tightening. He began to pace slowly, letting his mind run over each moment they had recorded. At 10:15, Miles left the study, assured the canon was alive and well. The watch found on the canon's wrist was set 3 hours fast, meaning that when the watch showed 1 in the morning, the actual time was 10 at night. The body was discovered at 7 a.m., but the time of death must have been closer to 1 or 2 a.m., based on the state of rigor mortis and other medical signs. Mrs. Brill nodded. Which means there was a wide window between 10:15 and 1 or 2 a.m., during which the murder could have occurred. Whimsy regarded her thoughtfully. Precisely. Now, you mentioned hearing footsteps in the hall after midnight, but before you retired? Yes. I thought it was the wind or a restless animal, but the noise was deliberate. Footsteps of a heavy boot, Miles added. From those prints outside, someone was moving purposefully. Whimsy's fingers drummed on the desk. The visitor refused entry 3 nights ago. We should consider that he may have returned, unknown to you. Mrs. Brill's face paled. It's possible, but the housekeeper keeps the keys, and I would have noticed. Unless someone else had access, Whimsy said, eyes narrowing. Or was let in. The three shared a glance, heavy with implication. Have either of you seen the visitor since that night? Whimsy pressed. No, Miles said quickly. He disappeared into the night after being turned away. But someone could have impersonated him, Whimsy mused, or disguised themselves. We must keep all options open. He turned to the locket and the note. The letter signed "A Friend" is a strange one. It implies both warning and closeness. A friend who warns of betrayal is a friend aware of dark secrets. Do either of you know of anyone close to the canon who might use such language? Mrs. Brill hesitated. There was a distant cousin, Harold Marston. He was always in the background, never fully trusted, but loyal enough on the surface. Miles frowned. I never heard of him much, only stories about family arguments years ago. Whimsy's eyes sharpened. Harold Marston, then, becomes a person of interest. We must learn more of his recent whereabouts. The sudden rustle of papers interrupted them. Whimsy unfolded another letter found with the bundle. It was from Harold himself, dated just a week before the murder. The tone was urgent, almost desperate. Edwin, you must listen. The past cannot be buried forever. Our family's sins will come to light if you continue your silence. Meet me. We must speak. A heavy silence settled. So, Whimsy said quietly, the canon was under pressure from this cousin. Perhaps he feared exposure or blackmail. The note in the parcel, the warnings, they point toward a hidden history. Miles paced again, restless. If the canon was afraid, it would explain the locked drawers, the secret messages. But who killed him, and why? Whimsy folded his hands, considering. Let us return to the physical evidence. The locked drawer contained the locket and the parcel, which we have examined. The study door was locked when Miles left. Yet the canon's body was found inside. Someone must have had a key, or the door was locked afterward. Mrs. Brill bit her lip. I have the only spare keys for the house. Whimsy looked at her steadily. And you deny anyone else having keys? Yes, except the canon himself and you, Miles, I believe. Miles nodded. I never had a key. I left the door locked. Whimsy tapped the desk, which suggests either the canon locked himself in or the killer locked the door behind them. He studied the group carefully. Mrs. Brill, did you see anyone else in the house that night? Her eyes flicked down. No one. I was in my quarters most of the evening. I heard nothing suspicious after the footsteps. And the canon's rooms? Did you notice anything unusual in the hours before? She shook her head. No, except that he was restless, pacing late into the night. I heard him whispering to himself. Whispering? Whimsy pressed. Yes. The name Edith came up several times, and words like forgiveness and betrayal. Whimsy's face darkened. The past weighs heavily then. Miles looked uneasy. Could it have been a secret lover or a lost relationship? Or a family scandal, Whimsy said. We cannot ignore the weight of history here. He stepped to the door and opened it slowly, peering into the darkened hallway. The faint light from the rising sun filtered through the windows, painting the walls with pale gold. We must search the house again, carefully. There may be things overlooked in the first sweep. The trio set out together, moving methodically through the rooms, checking every corner. Whimsy's keen eye caught a small scrap of paper beneath a side table, nearly hidden under the rug. He bent and picked it up. An old photograph, yellowed with age, showing a young woman standing beside the canon and a stern-faced man. Who is this? Whimsy asked. Mrs. Brill gasped. That's Edith, the canon's wife, before the accident. And the man, that's Harold Marston. Whimsy studied the image. The three of them together, once. But time has divided them. He turned the photo over, finding a faint inscription. Family is both bond and burden. Everything points to a family torn apart, Whimsy murmured. And those wounds, left to fester, can become fatal. They moved toward the back stairs when Miles stopped abruptly. Wait, there's something else. The study window, it was slightly ajar. Could someone have entered or left that way? Whimsy approached and examined the latch. It is possible, though the window is high. A determined person could have climbed up. Footprints outside match that theory, Miles said. Whimsy looked to Mrs. Brill. Were you aware of anyone with the skill or desperation to make such an entry? She shook her head. No, it would have been dangerous. Then this was no ordinary intruder, Whimsy said. This was someone with purpose and courage, or desperation. He glanced back toward the study where the locket and letters still lay. The question remains, who gained from the canon's death, and what secret were they desperate to keep hidden? The room felt colder now, as if the house itself awaited the final revelation. Whimsy's voice was steady. We are close, but the truth will not emerge without a confrontation. We must prepare to face those shadows lurking within this family and the ghosts of its past. Miles nodded, resolve hardening in his eyes. Mrs. Brill, though frightened, showed a flicker of determination. Together, they returned to the study, the weight of dawn pressing in, knowing that the moment of reckoning approached, and with it, the chance to finally unravel the tangled web of deceit that had ended a man's life. The quiet in the house seemed to thicken with each passing moment as Whimsy, Miles, and Mrs. Brill gathered once more in the study. The faint light of dawn seeped through the heavy curtains, casting long shadows across the worn floorboards, as if the very walls held their breath in anticipation of what was to come. The photograph of Edith and Harold lay on the desk, a silent testament to the fractured past, now threatening to engulf the present. Whimsy leaned over the photograph, tracing the faded ink of the inscription beneath it. Family is both bond and burden, he murmured. The words seemed to echo the unspoken tension filling the room. He turned slowly, eyes sharp and assessing. We are now certain that the canon's death was no random act. The threats, the hidden letters, the visitor denied entry, all pieces of a deliberate plan. But who held the key to his fate, and by what means? Miles paced restlessly, his hands clasped behind his back. The footprints outside the back door suggest an intruder who came prepared to move quietly and with purpose. But that window, it was ajar. Could it have been the entry point? Whimsy moved to the window and examined the latch. It would require considerable agility to enter or exit here. However, desperation can sharpen skills. If the intruder was someone desperate enough, the risk would be worth taking. Mrs. Brill's eyes were wide, reflecting a mixture of fear and realization. If the visitor was indeed involved, it would explain the refusal to let him in at first. He may have returned later, unnoticed. Whimsy nodded. We must ascertain who had the knowledge and opportunity to move about the house unseen. Mrs. Brill, you mentioned overhearing an argument through the study door, did you say? She swallowed, nodding slowly. Yes. It was late, after midnight. I heard raised voices, angry, pleading. The name Edith was spoken, along with words like forgiveness and betrayal. I was too frightened to investigate further. Whimsy's gaze sharpened. The past, then, was very much alive in the canon's final hours. The name Edith, his late wife, seemed central to this. Miles's jaw tightened. But what could forgiveness or betrayal mean here? Was there something hidden in the canon's past that resurfaced? Possibly, Whimsy said quietly, and perhaps someone wanted it to remain buried, at any cost. He turned to Mrs. Brill. You said the keys were in your charge. Could anyone else have had access? She hesitated, glancing down at her trembling hands. Only the canon himself and Miles, I believe. I keep a spare, but I have never given it to anyone else. Is it certain no one else could have had a key, by mistake or design? Whimsy pressed gently. No, I'm sure. Whimsy considered this, then moved to the desk. The locked drawer, containing the locket and the note, was discovered intact, yes? Yes, Mrs. Brill confirmed, but the canon's study door was locked when Miles left. Yet the canon's body was found inside the study, Whimsy said, voice low and deliberate. Either the door was locked after the murder, or the canon himself locked it prior to his death. Miles frowned. If the canon locked himself in, who had the means to get in or out? An excellent question, Whimsy replied. It suggests the killer was either inside already or found another way in and out, like the window. He paused, then added, the footprints outside lend weight to the theory of an intruder with detailed knowledge of the house's vulnerabilities. Mrs. Brill shuddered. But who could that be? Whimsy's eyes narrowed in thought. Let us turn again to the letters. He picked up the one from Harold Marston, dated just days before the murder, with its urgent warning. The cousin is clearly a pivotal figure. If he threatened the canon with exposure or demanded something, the tension could have escalated fatally. Miles nodded slowly. But I have never met Harold. Do we know if he was in the area recently? I intend to find out, Whimsy said firmly. This family feud may hold the key. We should also consider who else might benefit from the canon's silence. He moved toward the fireplace, fingers brushing the mantel absent-mindedly as he spoke. The parcel, the locket, the note signed, "A Friend," all suggest that the canon lived with fear of betrayal from someone close. Mrs. Brill's voice was a whisper. He never trusted easily, even those closest to him. Trust can be a dangerous thing, Whimsy mused, especially when built on fragile foundations. Suddenly, Miles stopped mid-step, his eyes fixed on a small irregularity on the floor near the desk. Look here. Whimsy crouched down to examine a faint scuff mark that seemed out of place. It was a narrow scratch, almost imperceptible, but definite. This mark suggests a small object was dragged or pushed across the floor. Could it have been the locket? Miles asked. Unlikely, Whimsy replied. But it might have been the parcel or the letters, moved hastily or dropped. His gaze lifted to the walls, scanning for anything overlooked. Then, almost imperceptibly, he noticed a faint outline near the baseboard, a subtle discoloration in the wallpaper. Whimsy moved closer and pressed gently. The paper shifted slightly, revealing the edge of a hidden compartment in the wall. Mrs. Brill gasped. I never knew that was there. Whimsy carefully pried open the panel. Inside lay a bundle of papers tied with a black ribbon, yellowed with age and brittle at the edges. He untied the ribbon and began to leaf through the documents. Letters, records, financial statements, he murmured. These papers appear to relate to the canon's dealings before his marriage. There are names, sums of money, dates, some referencing Harold Marston, others less familiar. He handed a letter to Miles. Read this one. Miles took it and read aloud. You must not ignore what has been done. The debts must be repaid, or the truth will come to light. This family's honor depends on silence. Whimsy's face grew grim. A debt, a threat, a secret kept at all costs. Mrs. Brill wrapped her hands tightly. Could this have been the reason for the murder? To silence the canon before the truth emerged? Very possible, Whimsy said. Now, we have motive, fear of exposure, and opportunity given the visitor's denied entry but likely return. He paced slowly, piecing the narrative together. The canon received threats from within his family and possibly others. He tried to keep the past locked away, but the burden grew too heavy. Someone, perhaps Harold or an accomplice, decided to end the matter permanently. Do you think the visitor was Harold? Miles asked. It fits, Whimsy said, but we must confirm. We need to track Harold's movements and question anyone who might have seen him near the house. A sudden thought struck him. Mrs. Brill, did the canon ever mention a secret meeting or an appointment in the days before his death? She nodded slowly. He mentioned a meeting but refused to say with whom. He seemed anxious, even afraid. That meeting may have been with Harold or the friend who warned him, Whimsy said. One of these encounters may have set the fatal chain in motion. He took a deep breath. There is one more thing, The locket contains Edith's portrait, his lost love, the source of his grief. Could the secrets tied to Edith also be part of this? Mrs. Brill looked away, troubled. Edith died young, and the circumstances were whispered about. Some believed it was an accident, others suspected something darker. Miles's voice was low. Are you suggesting that Edith's death might connect to this family feud? Wimsey nodded. It is possible. The unresolved pain and suspicion could have fermented into resentment. The canon's enemies may have feared what knowledge he held. The room fell silent as the weight of that possibility settled over them. Wimsey's eyes shone with determination. Our next step is to locate Harold Marston, uncover his recent activities, and discover who else knew of these secrets. We must also re-examine the timeline closely, ensuring no detail is overlooked. He turned to Miles. I want you to speak again with Mrs. Brill, recounting all events precisely and noting any inconsistencies or details forgotten earlier. To Mrs. Brill, he said, you will accompany me to the grounds. We will examine the footprints in the window more closely. There may be evidence yet undiscovered. As they prepared to depart, Wimsey paused by the desk, eyes lingering on the photograph once more. The past is a relentless force, he said softly. But the truth, no matter how long concealed, will out. With that, they stepped out of the study and into the awakening house, the day ahead heavy with promise and peril. Wimsey stepped into the fresh morning air, the chill of dawn still clinging to the garden's edges, and motioned for Mrs. Brill to follow. The footprints by the back door remained visible in the soft earth, faint but distinct, tracing a deliberate path that led toward the high window of the study. Kneeling, Wimsey examined the impressions closely, noting the pattern of the tread and the depth of each step. The boots were heavy, the gait sure and measured, a sign that whoever had walked here knew exactly where they were going. Someone who knew this house intimately, he murmured. Not a stranger stumbling blindly in the dark. Mrs. Brill nodded, her expression tense. The canon's family were the only ones to come here regularly. No servants or tradesmen would have been out at this hour. Wimsey stood and glanced up at the slightly ajar window, its latch loosened just enough to allow entrance. The ledge was narrow but not impossible to climb for a determined individual. Desperation and determination, he said thoughtfully. The intruder took a risk, yet the methodical footprints indicate careful planning. As he circled the house, his mind turned over the newly discovered documents hidden behind the panel. The letters and financial records hinted at debts, betrayals, and blackmail tangled deep within the family's past. The urgency in Harold Marston's letter suggested more than a mere familial quarrel. It pointed toward something dark, something the canon was desperate to keep secret. Returning to the porch, Wimsey motioned Mrs. Brill to accompany him inside. We must review the timeline with even greater precision. Every sound, every movement matters. In the study, Miles was already awaiting them, his demeanor somber but attentive. Wimsey wasted no time in gathering the details anew. Mrs. Brill, you heard raised voices after midnight, yes? Can you recall any more of what was said? She hesitated, then spoke carefully. It was fragmented, but the name Edith was clear. The words forgiveness and betrayal echoed repeatedly. The tone was desperate, anguished. Wimsey's gaze sharpened. And this was shortly before you heard the footsteps outside? Yes, soon after. Miles frowned. The canon was clearly troubled by something from his past, and it came back to haunt him in his final hours. Wimsey nodded. It would seem so. But what of the visitor denied entry a few nights prior? Could he have returned late after Mrs. Brill had retired to confront the canon? Mrs. Brill swallowed nervously. It is possible. I was not in the house the entire night, only in my quarters. And the locked door of the study? Wimsey questioned. Was it locked before the canon was found dead? Miles replied. When I left the room at 10:15, the door was locked from the inside. I assumed the canon had locked it, behind himself. Then the murderer must have been inside, or entered and left through that window, Whimsy concluded. The footprints suggest the latter, but we must be certain. He moved to the window and examined it once more, gently testing the latch. This window was left unlocked deliberately, I believe. A trap or a point of escape. Miles joined him, eyes scanning the garden. If the canon knew he was in danger, he might have left it open for someone to find him, or perhaps to allow an enemy to enter. Mrs. Brill shivered. But why would he invite such danger? Whimsy turned to her, voice soft but firm. Fear can lead men to strange decisions, Mrs. Brill, especially when secrets weigh heavy. He took a breath and continued. The parcel with the locket, the hidden correspondence, the locked drawers, all signs the canon was protecting something deeply personal. The name Edith, the reference to forgiveness, the bitterness in Harold's letters. These clues paint a picture of a man ensnared by his past. Miles rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Could Edith's death have been more than an accident? Mrs. Brill looked away, voice barely a whisper. There were whispers, rumors that the accident was not as it seemed, but no proof. Whimsy's eyes darkened. Rumors like those can breed grudges that outlive the dead. Perhaps someone blamed the canon or feared what he knew. He turned toward the desk, scanning the scattered papers. We need to find Harold Marston. If he was pressuring the canon, he may also be our key to understanding the events of that night. Miles nodded in agreement. I will make inquiries in the village immediately. If Harold is here, someone will have seen him. Whimsy's gaze lingered on the letters. There is one other thing. The note signed, "A friend." A curious phrase. It suggests the canon was not alone, that he had confidants or enemies masquerading as allies. Mrs. Brill's face tightened. The canon was a private man, but there were always rumors of an old friend, someone who knew the family's secrets. Secrets that could kill, Whimsy said grimly. He rose and moved to the fireplace, thinking aloud. The study door was locked from the inside, yes, but if the canon was confronted by someone unexpected, he may have tried to barricade himself. And failed, Miles added quietly. Whimsy examined the scuff marks near the desk again. These marks suggest a struggle, or at least a hurried movement. Perhaps the parcel was dropped or pushed aside in a moment of panic. He glanced toward the door. Yet no signs of forced entry were found. Only the open window. Mrs. Brill's hands trembled slightly. Could the intruder have had a key? Only 3 sets exist, Whimsy reminded her. You keep one. The canon had one, and Miles does not. Mrs. Brill nodded. That's correct. Whimsy tapped his chin thoughtfully. Unless a duplicate key exists or someone found a way to enter without one. He looked toward the window again, then back to the footprints outside. Our intruder was bold, skilled, and possibly desperate, a man who feared exposure or ruin. Miles paced slowly. Could the debts mentioned in these letters have been gambling debts, or something more sinister? Whimsy shook his head. Financial ruin is one thing, but these letters speak of debts of honor, blackmail, and hidden sins. The canon's family name was at stake. He turned to Mrs. Brill. You mentioned the canon pacing, whispering late into the night. Was there any mention of a meeting or appointment? She nodded. He said he had a meeting, but refused to say with whom. He seemed afraid. Then it's likely that meeting never happened, Whimsy said, or it ended in tragedy. The 3 sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the morning's revelations pressing down on them. Whimsy broke the silence. We must gather more information on Harold Marston, but we also need to re-examine those who might have known of the canon's secret meeting. Friends, family, even servants. Miles looked at Whimsy. And the visitor denied entry? Could he have been a red herring? Or a key player? Both possibilities exist, Whimsy replied. The visitor's identity and purpose remain mysteries. He might have been an ally, an enemy, or both. He stood abruptly, eyes bright with renewed purpose. I will speak to the village constable and seek any news of Harold. Miles, you should interview Mrs. Brill again, carefully documenting everything she remembers." Turning to Mrs. Brill, he said gently, "Your role is crucial. Any detail, no matter how small, might shed light on what happened." She nodded, visibly steadied by his calm resolve. Whimsy moved toward the window once more, looking out at the garden bathed in the soft gold of the morning sun. "Time is against us, but the truth will come. It must." As they prepared to leave the study, a sudden thought struck Whimsy. He reached into his coat and produced a small notebook, flipping it open to make notes. The connections were beginning to form, a tangled web of secrets, betrayals, and fears. The puzzle was not yet complete, but with each piece uncovered, the final picture grew clearer. Outside, the house creaked and settled as the day advanced, a silent witness to the unfolding drama within. Whimsy's voice was steady as he spoke his final words before they parted. "We stand on the edge of revelation. Let us proceed carefully, and with all the cunning this case demands." Whimsy stood for a long moment by the study window, gazing out as the morning light stretched across the garden, painting the scene with a deceptive calm. Beneath that tranquil surface lay a web of secrets, twisting tighter with every uncovered letter, every whispered confession, and every footstep frozen in the soil outside. His mind churned over the puzzle, piecing together fragments that, at first glance, seemed disparate but were in fact threads of the same dark tapestry. Turning away from the window, he found Mrs. Brill watching him closely, her hands clenched nervously. "Mrs. Brill," he said gently, "you have been indispensable in helping us understand this tragedy. I must ask, did the canon ever mention any visitors other than the one you refused entry to? Anyone who might have come without notice?" She hesitated, the question clearly troubling her. "No one comes here without notice, Mr. Whimsy. At least not since the accident with Miss Edith. The canon was very strict about that." Her voice softened. "But there was a man I saw once, lurking near the edge of the woods. It was some weeks before the murder, and I thought little of it at the time. He disappeared quickly when he noticed me." Whimsy's eyes narrowed. "A stranger in the woods? That is curious. Did you recognize him at all?" "No, sir. He was unremarkable, but there was something about his manner, a furtiveness that made me uneasy." She shivered slightly, drawing her shawl tighter. "That may be important," Whimsy agreed. "We must consider the possibility of a third party, someone watching, waiting, and perhaps biding their time." He turned to Miles, who had been silent, his expression shadowed with concern. "Have you discovered anything about Harold Marston's whereabouts recently?" Miles nodded grimly. "Yes. The local innkeeper recalled seeing a man matching Harold's description passing through the village just 2 days ago. He appeared agitated, constantly looking over his shoulder, and left shortly after dawn." Whimsy folded his arms. "A man on edge, fleeing or pursuing something. It fits the pattern." "Have you learned whether Harold had any known associates or rivals in the area?" Whimsy asked. "Not directly," Miles replied. "But the village has its whispers. Some say Harold was involved in gambling debts. Others hint at old family grudges." Whimsy smiled faintly. "Old grudges rarely die quietly. They fester until they poison the present." He returned to the study table where the letters lay spread out, their yellowed pages seeming almost to pulse with the weight of their secrets. Picking up one, he traced the handwriting with his finger. These letters, threatening, urgent, desperate, suggest that the canon's past sins were not so easily buried. Mrs. Brill's eyes filled with tears. He was a proud man, but afraid that what happened with Edith would be revealed. Whimsy's voice softened. "Tell me more about Edith. What do you know of her death?" The housekeeper sighed deeply, her face clouding. "The canon never spoke openly about it, but the story I heard, whispered by old servants before I came here, is that Edith's death was no accident. Some say it was a careless mistake. Others believe there was more to it, something the canon kept hidden out of shame and fear. Miles's jaw tightened. If that secret came to light, it could destroy the family's name. And perhaps someone wanted to make sure it stayed buried. Whimsy nodded. Indeed. The presence of the locket with Edith's portrait in the locked drawer tells us the canon held tightly to her memory, and perhaps to his guilt. He rose and paced slowly, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Now, consider the sequence of events on the night of the murder. The visitor is denied entry. Voices are heard, anguished and pleading, mentioning Edith and betrayal. Footsteps cross the garden and approach the window. Mrs. Brill swallowed hard. Yes, it was terrifying. Then the locked door of the study, Whimsy continued. Either the canon locked himself in, or the killer did. But the window was left open, intentionally, I believe, to allow escape or entry. Miles frowned. It could have been a trap, then. The canon may have believed the visitor was coming to reconcile or threaten, or both. Exactly, Whimsy said. The struggle, the scuff marks, the dropped parcel, all signs of confrontation. He moved to the fireplace and picked up the small bundle of papers found hidden behind the wallpaper panel. These documents reveal financial records, letters of threat, and correspondence that tie Harold Marston not only to the canon's debts, but to demands for silence. Miles examined one of the letters. Repay what you owe, or the truth will be told. A chilling ultimatum. The truth that would shatter the family, Whimsy said gravely. We have motive, means, and opportunity, but who among these players stepped beyond the threshold of law into murder? He paused, then spoke with renewed intensity. We must focus on Harold Marston. If he felt cornered or betrayed, he may have confronted the canon with deadly resolve. Do you intend to pursue him? Miles asked. Yes, Whimsy said firmly. But we must also consider another possibility. The friend who sent the parcel and note. Who was this ally or adversary who wished to warn the canon? Mrs. Brill shook her head. I never heard of such a friend. Nor I, Whimsy admitted. But the note's tone suggests familiarity. Perhaps a secret keeper, perhaps a blackmailer. He returned to the letters on the desk and then to the locket, staring intently at the delicate portrait of Edith enclosed within. Edith's memory haunts this case, Whimsy murmured. Her death, the canon's guilt, the family's shame, all intertwined. Mrs. Brill's voice broke. If only the truth could bring peace. Indeed, Whimsy agreed, but truth often exacts a terrible price. He looked toward the door as a knock interrupted their thoughts. A messenger entered, handing Whimsy a folded note. He opened it quickly, scanning the contents. News from the village constable, Whimsy announced. Harold Marston was seen entering an old hunting lodge some miles outside town yesterday. The place has been abandoned for years, but it seems someone is using it again. Miles frowned. Could he be hiding there? Or plotting, Whimsy said thoughtfully. We must investigate immediately. Turning to Mrs. Brill, Whimsy instructed, Please remain here and keep a close watch. Should anyone approach, notify us at once. She nodded, anxiety evident in her eyes. As Whimsy and Miles prepared to leave, he cast one last glance around the study, the locked drawers, the hidden compartment, the faded photograph. This house holds more than memories, he said quietly. It is a vault of secrets, and one of them is a killer. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, the shadows retreating, but the darkness in the heart of the mystery deepening still. Together, Whimsy and Miles set off toward the hunting lodge, their pace brisk but cautious. The path was narrow and winding, flanked by dense woods that whispered with every breeze. As they approached the lodge, a cold silence fell. The building loomed, its weathered timbers sagging beneath years of neglect. The door stood ajar, creaking softly. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint scent of smoke. Scattered papers littered the floor, and signs of recent occupation were unmistakable. Whimsy crouched beside a fresh footprint embedded in the dirt floor. Someone was here recently, Harold, no doubt. Miles moved to a shattered window, peering out. If Harold fled, he must have left this way. Whimsy nodded. Or he expected pursuit and prepared an escape. They heard a faint rustling from the back room, soft and hesitant. "Stay close," Whimsy warned, drawing a small pistol he carried. They advanced slowly, the tension mounting with each step. Suddenly, a figure burst from the shadows. A man gaunt and wild-eyed, clutching a small bundle to his chest. "Stop!" the man cried. "You don't understand. I had no choice." Whimsy stepped forward calmly. "Harold Marston, I presume?" The man's shoulders slumped. "Yes, but listen to me. It's not what you think." Whimsy's eyes searched his face. "Then explain yourself, and quickly." Harold took a trembling breath. The canon owed more than money. Secrets, lies. Edith's death was no accident, but neither was the canon the villain you believe. Miles frowned. Then who was? Harold's gaze flickered to the bundle. "The truth is buried here. Proof that someone else wanted Edith silenced and the canon destroyed to cover it up." Whimsy motioned to the bundle. "May I see it?" With shaking hands, Harold handed over a sheaf of letters and photographs. Whimsy's eyes widened as he flipped through them, recognizing names and dates that shifted the entire narrative. "Your story is beginning to make sense," he said quietly. "But the question remains. Who stands to gain from this tragedy?" Harold swallowed hard. "I feared the canon's family, but there is someone else. Someone closer than we ever imagined." A sudden noise outside drew their attention, a shadowy figure slipping away into the trees. Whimsy's voice was sharp. "After him!" The chase was on, the forest closing in as the hunt for truth and justice reached its deadly climax. Whimsy stood for a long moment by the study window, gazing out as the morning light stretched across the garden, painting the scene with a deceptive calm. Beneath that tranquil surface lay a web of secrets, twisting tighter with every uncovered letter, every whispered confession, and every footstep frozen in the soil outside. His mind churned over the puzzle, piecing together fragments that, at first glance, seemed disparate but were in fact threads of the same dark tapestry. Turning away from the window, he found Mrs. Brill watching him closely, her hands clenched nervously. "Mrs. Brill," he said gently, "you have been indispensable in helping us understand this tragedy. I must ask, did the canon ever mention any visitors other than the one you refused entry to? Anyone who might have come without notice?" She hesitated, the question clearly troubling her. "No one comes here without notice, Mr. Whimsy. At least, not since the accident with Miss Edith. The canon was very strict about that." Her voice softened. "But there was a man I saw once, lurking near the edge of the woods. It was some weeks before the murder, and I thought little of it at the time. He disappeared quickly when he noticed me." Whimsy's eyes narrowed. "A stranger in the woods? That is curious. Did you recognize him at all?" "No, sir. He was unremarkable, but there was something about his manner, a furtiveness that made me uneasy." She shivered slightly, drawing her shawl tighter. "That may be important," Whimsy agreed. "We must consider the possibility of a third party. Someone watching, waiting, and perhaps biding their time." He turned to Miles, who had been silent, his expression shadowed with concern. "Have you discovered anything about Harold Marston's whereabouts recently?" Miles nodded grimly. "Yes. The local innkeeper recalled seeing a man matching Harold's description passing through the village just 2 days ago. He appeared agitated, constantly looking over his shoulder, and left shortly after dawn." Whimsy folded his arms. "A man on edge, fleeing or pursuing something. It fits the pattern." Have you learned whether Harold had any known associates or rivals in the area? Whimsy asked. Not directly, Miles replied, but the village has its whispers. Some say Harold was involved in gambling debts, others hint at old family grudges. Whimsy smiled faintly. Old grudges rarely die quietly. They fester until they poison the present. He returned to the study table where the letters lay spread out, their yellowed pages seeming almost to pulse with the weight of their secrets. Picking up one, he traced the handwriting with his finger. These letters, threatening, urgent, desperate, suggest that the canon's past sins were not so easily buried. Mrs. Brill's eyes filled with tears. He was a proud man, but afraid that what happened with Edith would be revealed. Whimsy's voice softened. Tell me more about Edith. What do you know of her death? The housekeeper sighed deeply, her face clouding. The canon never spoke openly about it, but the story I heard, whispered by old servants before I came here, is that Edith's death was no accident. Some say it was a careless mistake. Others believe there was more to it. Something the canon kept hidden out of shame and fear. Miles's jaw tightened. If that secret came to light, it could destroy the family's name. And perhaps someone wanted to make sure it stayed buried. Whimsy nodded. Indeed. The presence of the locket with Edith's portrait in the locked drawer tells us the canon held tightly to her memory, and perhaps to his guilt. He rose and paced slowly, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Now consider the sequence of events on the night of the murder. The visitor is denied entry. Voices are heard, anguished and pleading, mentioning Edith and betrayal. Footsteps cross the garden and approach the window. Mrs. Brill swallowed hard. Yes, it was terrifying. Then the locked door of the study. Whimsy continued. Either the canon locked himself in, or the killer did. But the window was left open, intentionally, I believe, to allow escape or entry. Miles frowned. It could have been a trap, then. The canon may have believed the visitor was coming to reconcile or threaten, or both. Exactly, Whimsy said. The struggle, the scuff marks, the dropped parcel, all signs of confrontation. He moved to the fireplace and picked up the small bundle of papers found hidden behind the wallpaper panel. These documents reveal financial records, letters of threat, and correspondence that tie Harold Marston not only to the canon's debts, but to demands for silence. Miles examined one of the letters. Repay what you owe, or the truth will be told. A chilling ultimatum. The truth that would shatter the family, Whimsy said gravely. We have motive, means, and opportunity, but who among these players stepped beyond the threshold of law into murder? He paused, then spoke with renewed intensity. We must focus on Harold Marston. If he felt cornered or betrayed, he may have confronted the canon with deadly resolve. Do you intend to pursue him? Miles asked. Yes, Whimsy said firmly. But we must also consider another possibility, the friend who sent the parcel and note. Who was this ally or adversary who wished to warn the canon? Mrs. Brill shook her head. I never heard of such a friend. Nor I, Whimsy admitted. But the note's tone suggests familiarity. Perhaps a secret keeper, perhaps a blackmailer. He returned to the letters on the desk and then to the locket, staring intently at the delicate portrait of Edith enclosed within. Edith's memory haunts this case, Whimsy murmured. Her death, the canon's guilt, the family's shame, all intertwined. Mrs. Brill's voice broke. If only the truth could bring peace. Indeed, Whimsy agreed, but truth often exacts a terrible price. He looked toward the door as a knock interrupted their thoughts. A messenger entered, handing Whimsy a folded note. He opened it quickly, scanning the contents. News from the village constable, Whimsy announced. Harold Marston was seen entering an old hunting lodge some miles outside town yesterday. The place has been abandoned for years, but it seems someone is using it again. Miles frowned. Could he be hiding there? Or plotting, Whimsy said thoughtfully. We must investigate immediately. Turning to Mrs. Brill, Whimsy instructed, Please remain here and keep a close watch. Should anyone approach, notify us at once. She nodded, anxiety evident in her eyes. As Whimsy and Miles prepared to leave, he cast one last glance around the study, the locked drawers, the hidden compartment, the faded photograph. This house holds more than memories, he said quietly. It is a vault of secrets, and one of them is a killer. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, the shadows retreating, but the darkness in the heart of the mystery deepening still. Together, Whimsy and Miles set off toward the hunting lodge, their pace brisk but cautious. The path was narrow and winding, flanked by dense woods that whispered with every breeze. As they approached the lodge, a cold silence fell. The building loomed, its weathered timbers sagging beneath years of neglect. The door stood ajar, creaking softly. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint scent of smoke. Scattered papers littered the floor, and signs of recent occupation were unmistakable. Whimsy crouched beside a fresh footprint embedded in the dirt floor. Someone was here recently. Harold, no doubt. Miles moved to a shattered window, peering out. If Harold fled, he must have left this way. Whimsy nodded. Or he expected pursuit and prepared an escape. They heard a faint rustling from the back room, soft and hesitant. Stay close, Whimsy warned, drawing a small pistol he carried. They advanced slowly, the tension mounting with each step. Suddenly, a figure burst from the shadows, a man gaunt and wild-eyed, clutching a small bundle to his chest. Stop, the man cried. You don't understand. I had no choice. Whimsy stepped forward calmly. Harold Marston, I presume. The man's shoulders slumped. Yes, but listen to me. It's not what you think. Whimsy's eyes searched his face. Then explain yourself, and quickly. Harold took a trembling breath. The canon owed more than money. Secrets, lies. Edith's death was no accident, but neither was the canon the villain you believe. Miles frowned. Then who was? Harold's gaze flickered to the bundle. The truth is buried here. Proof that someone else wanted Edith silenced, and the canon destroyed to cover it up. Whimsy motioned to the bundle. May I see it? With shaking hands, Harold handed over a sheaf of letters and photographs. Whimsy's eyes widened as he flipped through them, recognizing names and dates that shifted the entire narrative. Your story is beginning to make sense, he said quietly. But the question remains, who stands to gain from this tragedy? Harold swallowed hard. I feared the canon's family, but there is someone else. Someone closer than we ever imagined. A sudden noise outside drew their attention, a shadowy figure slipping away into the trees. Whimsy's voice was sharp. After him. The chase was on, the forest closing in as the hunt for truth and justice reached its deadly climax. The forest swallowed the fleeing figure, leaves crunching under hurried footsteps, breath ragged in the cool air. Whimsy and Miles pressed on, the chase winding through gnarled oaks and tangled undergrowth until the quarry stumbled, caught in a thicket. Whimsy approached, calm as ever, a wry smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Mr. Pembroke, Whimsy said quietly, or shall I call you the true architect of this misery? The man's defiance wavered. You don't understand. It was for the family's good. Edith's scandal, if revealed, would ruin us all. I had to protect our name. By murder. Whimsy's voice was soft but unyielding. By framing Harold Marston and forcing the canon to a death of desperation. Pembroke's eyes flickered with the weight of guilt. He was weak. I did what was necessary. Whimsy nodded. The pieces finally aligned. The watch being 3 hours fast, the misaligned clocks, the staged alibi, each detail designed to mislead. Yet, as always, the truth is less dramatic than the shadows that veil it. Turning to Miles, Whimsy added, "Justice, in this case, is a matter of timing and of courage to see beyond appearances." The constables arrived, securing Pembroke as the dawn broke fully, spilling golden light over the once quiet village now stirred by revelations. Back at the vicarage, Whimsy settled into his chair, lighting a cigar with leisurely precision. "One might say, Miles, that truth is rather like a good cigar, best appreciated slowly, savored carefully, and always revealing more with each thoughtful puff." Miles smiled. "Indeed, my lord, and far more satisfying than the occult spectres we feared." Whimsy's eyes twinkled. But a hint of the Gothic keeps the mind sharp. After all, a good mystery requires a touch of darkness, though the solution remains firmly in the light. He stood, tipping an imaginary hat toward the window. "Until our next puzzle, then." And with that, Lord Peter Whimsy vanished into the morning mist, leaving behind the echoes of logic, irony, and a justice well served.